morning of November 19, 1978, a security man named Halbert Rennick was found lying on the gravel workpad at mile 617 of the Trans-Alaska right-of-way, in the hills about 40 miles north of Glennallen. He was 46 years old. He had worked 11 seasons in the Alaska interior and 4 on this particular spread. He was found 40 feet from the door of the sleeping trailers. He was on his left side, his arms were down, his legs were straight, and his head was pointed north, up the cleared line in the same direction as every dead bear that had been left on that pad in the 6 weeks before him. That is the detail that matters, and it is the detail the report says the least about.
The camp had 11 men and 1 woman on it that fall. 10 of them walked out to the Richardson Highway on the 19th and got in a truck. 1 of them did not walk out at all. He went up the right-of-way on foot sometime before dawn, and a search that ran 9 days found 2 of his belongings and nothing else. Most of what is known about those 6 weeks comes from a single source. In March of 1979, a welder named Terrence Vasco sat down in an office in Anchorage with an investigator working a claim against a contracting company and gave a statement that ran 22 pages. It is a strange document. For the first 9 pages, it reads like any workplace statement. Dates, shift hours, equipment, who reported to whom. Then it stops reading like that. The second source is the Spread Foreman's Camp Log, a hardbound daily book that was submitted along with the statement. It covers October and November of that year. 2 pages are missing from it. They were removed cleanly, not torn. The company applied for a solid waste disposal variance in December of 1978. The pit at mile 617 was covered over with fill and never excavated. The spread moved 11 days after the 19th and did not return. The state troopers filed the Rennick death under exposure with animal disturbance and closed it in January. Everything from here comes off those 22 pages in Terry Vasco's own telling. I want to start with the pit because everybody who hears this wants to start somewhere else, and the pit is where it starts. We had a hole. That is all it was. A hole in the ground about 90 feet off the back of the camp, downslope past the equipment row, and it had been there since the spread went in. Everything went in it. Kitchen waste, packaging, oil rag, cardboard, whatever. 2 winters of it. It was supposed to get burned, and it did get burned sometimes when somebody remembered, and the wind was right, and there was diesel to spare, which there mostly was not. Nobody thought about it. I want to be honest about that. Nobody stood around agonizing over the pit. It was a hole, and you threw things in it, and you went back to work. And in the fall, you get bears at a hole like that, because a bear in October is doing nothing but eating. That is the entire job of a bear in October. It is trying to put on enough fat to sleep through 6 months. So they came. The first one I saw was on the 4th. Big, blonde-faced black bear standing in the pit up past its knees in our garbage. And it had gotten into a case of shortening, and its whole muzzle and chest were white with it. And it looked up at me the way a cow looks at you. I stood there about 10 seconds. It went back to the shortening. I did not feel anything about it. I want that understood too. I was not scared, and I did not feel bad. I went in for dinner, and I told the table about the white face, and everybody laughed, and Fern did not. Fern Adley was our cook. She was 58, and she had been feeding camps in that country since before I could shave. And she had a thing about the pit that whole fall. She would not go past the kitchen door after 4 in the afternoon. She sent Junior out with the scraps, and if Junior was not there, she made somebody else do it. The men gave her a hard time about it, the way men do, and she took it the way cooks do. But that night she came around the end of the table and she put her hand flat on the plywood next to my plate and she waited until I looked up. She said that hole was going to bring us something. Somebody down the table said bears and she said no. And she went back to the griddle and that was the whole conversation. I did not think about it again for 4 weeks. I do not believe she knew what she meant. I want to be fair to her. I do not think she was sitting on some piece of knowledge. But she was 58 years old in a country that kills people, and she had a feeling about a hole in the ground, and she turned out to be right, and I have never been able to make that come out even in my head. Hal Rennick shot the first one on the 9th of October. Hal was camp security, which on a spread like that means one man with a rifle, a radio, a pickup, and a great many hours to fill. He was not a bad man, I want to say that plainly because of how this ends. He was a big, loud guy from Wisconsin who had been north long enough to think he understood the country. And he had the specific kind of confidence you get from surviving things you did not understand at the time. The bear was in the pit. Hal put one round into it from about 60 feet with a .30-06, and the whole camp heard it, and about 6 of us came around the corner of the shop at a run. It did not go down clean. It came out of that pit fast, uphill in the wrong direction entirely, and it went past the equipment row close enough that Wendell Crosby put a hand out and grabbed Junior Bellwether by the coat and pulled him behind a cat. It made about 40 yards up the slope, and then it went down in the alders, and we could hear it for a while. Hal wanted to go after it. Wendell told him no. It was 4 in the afternoon, and the light was going, and even Hal was not stupid enough to push it. So we stood at the bottom of the slope in a line like a bunch of idiots and listened to it die. Next morning, 4 of us went up with a come-along and a chain to drag it out. There was blood, plenty. There was a wallow in the crust where it had lain down and worked itself into a hollow. There was hair on the alder, and there was a drag mark going uphill from the wallow, maybe 18 inches wide, and we followed it about 200 yards, and it quit. It did not thin out. It did not go into cover. It ran across open crusted ground, and then there was nothing at the end of it. Junior said maybe wolves took it. I said, sure. That is what I said out loud. Sure, wolves. I have never in my life seen wolves pick a 250-pound animal up off the ground and carry it, and neither has anybody else, and I knew that standing there with a chain over my shoulder at 7 in the morning at 19 degrees. But I had a joint to finish before lunch, so we coiled the chain and walked back down, and I did not think about it again until the 28th. The second one was at the fuel bladders on the 17th. We had 2 big rubberized bladders on the east side of the pad inside a built-up berm, and a bear got in behind that berm at some point in the night and could not work out how to get back over it, and by morning it had gotten frantic. It had torn the tarp off a pallet of drums, it had rolled 2 of the drums, and it was at the corner of one of the bladders, going at the seam, and a bear can absolutely open one of those. That one was probably going to have to be shot by somebody. I will give Hal that much, and I will not take it back. But by the 17th, he had started to enjoy it, and that is the part. He was walking around with the rifle when he had no reason to be walking around with the rifle. He had a story about the 9th, and it got a little better every time he told it. And by the 17th, the first bear had charged him. He came around the berm, and he took his time, and he put the second one down at maybe 40 feet, and then he stood there with the rifle across his chest while it finished. Junior took a photograph of him standing over it. Somebody had a Kodak in the mess, and everybody was passing it around. Junior burned that photograph in a barrel in December. I know because he told me he had, and I asked him why, and he said he could not stand to look at Hal's face in it. We dragged that one out with a pickup and we put it in the pit, which, if you think about it for 2 seconds, is exactly the wrong place to put a dead bear when the reason you have bears in the first place is the pit. Nobody thought about it for 2 seconds. It was the closest hole, and it was cold, and we were behind. The 26th of October is the one. If you want to know when everything at mile 617 turned over, it was somewhere between 4 and 5 in the afternoon on the 26th. There was a sow with 2 yearlings working the tree line at the bottom of the pad. Yearlings, not cubs. Maybe 120 pounds apiece. Nearly independent, which matters legally and did not matter at all to what happened. They were not in camp. They had not been in camp. They were at the edge of the trees at about 130 yards, turning over deadfall, doing what bears do. Hal shot the sow from the pad. She went down where she stood. It was a good shot at that distance offhand, and I remember thinking so, and I am not proud of that, but I remember thinking it. And the yearlings did not run. That is the thing I have never been able to put down. They did not run. They stayed with her. They stood out there in the open at 130 yards with a man on a gravel pad holding a rifle, and one of them kept going in at her shoulder and backing off and going in again, and they stayed a long time. Long enough that somebody in the group said Hal ought to finish it, and Hal said something back and nobody pushed it. Wendell Crosby was standing about 12 feet from me. Wendell was 51 and he had run spreads all over that state. He watched the whole thing and he did not say one word. Then he turned around and walked to the office trailer and shut the door and did not come out until dinner. And I laughed. I want that on the record because it is true and because you ought to know what kind of man is telling you this. Somebody made a joke about Hal getting his winter meat and I laughed at it. I went to bed that night thinking about a bevel I had cut badly that morning. That is all. That is the entire contents of my head on October 26th, 1978. 2 nights later, there was a dead bear in the middle of the pad. Not at the pit, not at the tree line, the middle. In the working area, in the lights, between the pipe rack and the trailers, on ground that 11 people walked across 40 times a day. I did not find it. Fern found it at 10 past 5 in the morning on the 80 feet of gravel between the kitchen and the mess, which is the only walk that woman took after dark all fall. She did not scream. She went and got Wendell, and I heard the 2 of them go past my window. By the time I got boots on, there were 6 men standing around it in the dark with flashlights. It was an adult male, and it was a big animal, 400 pounds at least, considerably bigger than either of the ones Hal had shot. Nobody had shot it. That got established fast, and it got established loud because the first thing everybody thought was that Hal had finally come off the rails and started shooting them in camp. 2 men said it to his face. One of them had him by the coat. Hal had not fired his weapon since the 26th. He said so, and he was believed, and I will tell you exactly why he was believed. Because when Wendell asked him quietly, standing over that animal with a flashlight, Hal's face did a thing I had not seen it do before and did not see it do again until much later. He was not offended. He was not angry at being accused. He looked at Wendell, and then he looked down at the bear, and he looked frightened, and Hal Rennick did not have that in his repertoire. The animal's neck was wrong. It had not been shot, and it had not been chewed, and there was nothing on it that a firearm does. Its neck was wrong in a way I am not going to describe any further than that. And there was no blood on the pad around it. Not a drop, not a smear, which meant it had not died there, which meant it had died somewhere else, and gotten from that somewhere else into the middle of a lit gravel pad with 11 people and a running generator, and not one person heard a single thing. We loaded it with the forklift and put it in the pit and hosed the gravel. Later that day, I walked it off from where it had been lying to the door of the first sleeping trailer, 200 paces. Call it 600 feet. I have no idea why I did that. I did not know then that I was going to need the number. Junior and I walked the back trail in daylight on the 29th. There was one, and that is the thing. There was a clear drag coming down off the slope in the crust, about 18 inches wide, running down out of the northeast for something like 400 yards to the edge of the pad. Easy country to walk that time of year, frozen but not deep yet, so we went up it. The drag was continuous, that is worth saying. Whatever was under it never got set down and picked back up. And beside the drag, on the right-hand side of it the whole way, there were impressions. I am a welder. I am not a tracker. I have hunted since I was 9. And that is the extent of my qualification, and I am going to tell you what I saw and not what it means. They were barefoot, not boot, not pack, nothing with a sole. There was a heel and a forward pad, and there were toes. And the front of the print had driven in deeper than the back, which is what a print does when something is pulling weight behind it. I put my own boot in one. I wore a size 11 white slogger that year. It went inside the print with room in front of the toe and room behind the heel. Junior said 16 inches. I said more. So we did it properly because we were 2 men who did not want to walk back down the hill yet. Junior had a folding rule in his coat, a wooden lufkin, because Junior was a roustabout, and roustabouts carry everything. We found the clearest one we could, and we knelt down on either side of it, and we measured it 3 times. 19¼ inches heel to toe, 7½ across the ball. Junior wrote it on the inside of his cigarette pack. Then we went to do the stride, and that is where it came apart on me. The way you do it is one man stands at a print and the other walks forward to the next one and you measure between. Junior went ahead, and he kept walking. He went past where a man's next step would be. He went past where a tall man's next step would be. He got out to where he had to look back over his shoulder at me to make sure he was still on the line, and then he took one more step and stopped and stood on it. We got 51 inches between prints, then 49, then 53 going uphill. That is a stride, not a stretch. That is what it was doing all the way up that slope while it was dragging 400 pounds of dead bear. I sat down on the berm and put my hands on my knees and stayed there a while. Junior came back and he sat down next to me, and he did not ask why I was sitting down. That is the part I think about. He did not ask. The knocking started on the 1st of November, around 1 in the morning. I was awake because I had a bad tooth that fall and had been sleeping in 90-minute pieces since the middle of October. It sounded like a mallet on a pipe joint, which in a pipeline camp is not an alarming sound at all. That is a sound you hear 10,000 times a season. At 1 in the morning with the whole spread shut down, it is a different sound. It came from the north, up the cleared line, maybe a quarter mile out. Then there was one from the east, off the line entirely, back in the timber, a flatter tone, and it came about 4 seconds behind the first, which is about how long you wait when you're answering somebody. Then a third from the southeast, further out again. I lay in that bunk and listened to 3 separate points in the dark hit something hard, in order, twice around, and stop. I was not the only one up. Somebody 2 trailers down opened a door. Somebody else put a spotlight up the right-of-way from the cab of the pickup, and I heard the motor idling for 10 minutes and then shut off. In the morning, nobody said anything. I want to be honest about that. I did not bring it up because it was 1978 and I was 33 and I had a reputation as a steady hand. And the currency in a camp like that is being a man who does not say things. Fern told me at breakfast that she had heard it. She did not ask if I had. She put the plate down and told me she had heard it and looked at me while she said it, and then she went back to the griddle. I have thought about that a lot too. She was giving me a chance to say it out loud with a witness. I did not take it. The second one showed up on the 3rd behind the berm at the fuel bladders, in the exact spot where the second bear had been, not near it, in it, on the same 10 feet of ground. Now, when you have one dead animal in a strange place, that is a mystery. When you have a second one and it is somewhere that means something, that is not a mystery anymore. That is a sentence with a subject and a verb. There were 9 of us standing there, and every man understood it, and not one man said it. I noticed the head that morning. The one on the pad on the 28th had been pointing north. I knew that because I had walked around it 4 times with a flashlight. This one was pointing north. I left the group and I went over to where the first one had been, on the gravel between the pipe rack and the trailers. And I stood on the spot and I lined it up, and they were the same. Same orientation, near enough as makes no difference. 200 and something paces from the bladders to the trailer door. I stepped it twice and got 202 and 98, so call it 300 feet. 600, then 300. I did not have the pattern yet. I want to be clear about that. I had 2 numbers, 2 compass headings, and a bad feeling. The camp came apart on the 4th and 5th, and it came apart at dinner. There were 11 of us, and by then there were 2 camps inside the camp. There were men who wanted to be down that highway by the weekend. And there were men who had a wife and a note on a house and 8 weeks of winter work left on a contract, and who were doing arithmetic in their heads about how much a thing has to be worth before you walk away from $410 a week. I was in the second group. I had a wife and a note on a house in Palmer and a child coming in June. On the evening of the 4th, a pipe fitter out of Fairbanks stood up in the mess and said out loud what everybody had been not saying, which was that something was putting them there on purpose and it was doing it closer every time. And a man on my end of the table told him that it was wolves, and that it had been wolves since the 9th of October, and that if he wanted to quit, he could quit, and nobody would think anything of it. Which was a lie, and everyone at that table knew it was a lie, including the man who said it. It got loud. Wendell got up and shut it down and told everybody that the pit was going to get dealt with and that there was a schedule. The pipe fitter went out to the highway on the 6th. 2 other men went with him. That left 8 men and Fern and the 1,200 feet of gravel and whatever was doing this. I want to say the thing about that argument that has stayed with me the longest. Nobody in that room said the word bear. Not once the entire argument. 8 men shouting at each other for 20 minutes about what was happening, and not one of them named an animal. Because to name an animal, you have to have one in mind, and we did not. Hal's rifle went missing out of a locked gang box on the 6th. It was a Canuck box, steel, on the equipment row with a padlock on it. Wendell had made him start locking it up after the 26th, and Hal had made a whole production of it and then done it because Wendell signed the timesheets. The lock was on the box in the morning, lid down, hasp through, lock closed and locked. The rifle was gone. The lid on a knock box does not come off. There's no back to it. There is one way in, and it was shut and locked when Junior went to get a bar out of it at 7:15. We turned that camp over for 6 hours, every trailer, every truck, under the shop, the whole equipment row. Hal accused 2 men. One of them shoved him. We found it at about 2 in the afternoon, and it was found from a distance because the stock was pale wood against gravel, and Junior spotted it from up on the berm. It was 90 yards north of the pad, up the berm above camp. The stock was snapped through the wrist, which is the narrow part behind the receiver, and it had not been cracked, it had been broken through, and it takes a real and specific amount of force to do that to a walnut stock in cold weather. And the barrel had been driven down into the ground to a depth of about 14 inches. I want you to sit with that because I did. In November on the Alaska interior on a compacted pad, the ground is not ground anymore. It is a solid. We had needed a jackhammer that fall to set a grounding rod. Something put a rifle barrel into it like a man pushes a stake into a lawn. 2 of us tried to pull it out by hand and it did not move. We put a pipe wrench on it and got it rocking, and it came out in about 4 minutes of work. and when it came, the muzzle was full of frozen grit and the crown was mushroomed over. Hal took the pieces and walked back down to camp with them and did not say anything. He did not come out of his trailer that night. He left his light on, and you could see it from the pad, and it stayed on until the generator cut at 11. Then you could see a flashlight beam moving around behind that window. And it moved around behind that window for a long time. The third one was a yearling, and it came on the 9th. It was on the flat ground at the bottom of the pad at the tree line, on the exact spot where the sow had gone down on the 26th. And it was one of hers. I know it was one of hers because it had a torn ear that I had looked at through binoculars on the 26th of October while I was standing on the pad laughing at a joke about winter meat. Head pointing north, that is when it landed on us. Not one man working it out. About 6 of us standing at the bottom of the pad at 7 in the morning in the dark with lights. And one of us said it out loud, and the rest of us already had it. The pit, the bladders, the sow. It was putting them back where we took them. I went to the office trailer and took a weld procedure sheet off Wendell's desk and turned it over and drew the pad on the back of it. I put a mark at each location and the date beside it. That afternoon, I stepped all 3 properly with 100-foot tape with Junior on the dumb end, and I wrote the numbers down. 600 feet, 300 feet, 150 feet. I stood in the office trailer and put that piece of paper on Wendell's desk and turned it around so it faced him. He looked at it for a long time. Longer than it takes to read 3 numbers. Then he asked me if I had shown it to anybody else, and I said only Junior, and he asked me not to show it to anybody else. I have thought about that a great deal over the years, and I do not hold it against him. He had 8 people, a cook, a schedule, and a company 900 miles away in an office in Anchorage that would not have believed one word of it and would have had his job for saying it. What exactly was the man supposed to do? I saw it on the 12th. I'm going to tell this once, exactly, and I'm not going to embroider it. It was around 2 in the morning. I had gone out to the edge of the pad because the tooth was killing me, and I had taken something for it that was not working, and I wanted cold air on the side of my face. I was standing just inside the last of the light. There's a place on a lit work pad where the light gives out and the dark starts, and it is not gradual. It is a line on the ground. It was past that line, and it was coming across from the east, unhurried, on a heading that would take it up toward the tree line at the bottom of the slope. I could not tell you the color of it. I can tell you the shape. It was upright, and it was tall enough that I had to change what my body was doing to look at it. And it was wide through the shoulder in a way that did not fit with how it moved, because it moved smooth. There was no lurch in it anywhere. It had something in its hand, a length of spruce, peel clean, about 6 feet, and pale enough that it was the brightest thing out in that dark by a wide margin. It was dragging something behind it with the other hand, and I did not look at what. Here's the part I want to tell you, and it is the only thing about that entire fall that I actually understand. It saw me. It turned its head and looked at me from maybe 70 feet, and it kept walking. It did not stop. It did not speed up. It did not change one single thing about what it was doing. I have been looked at by a bear, and I have been looked at by a bull moose in the rut, and both of those are an animal deciding what you are. This was not that. This was a man walking past your parked car while you're sitting in it. I was not the one it had business with. That is what I understood standing there in the cold, and it is what I have believed every day since. Whatever that was, it was not out there about me. I was furniture. I went back inside and I sat on the edge of my bunk with my boots on and my coat on until it got light. And at 6, I went and welded for 9 hours, and I did not tell anybody for 4 months. Wendell tried to fix it, and I want him to get the credit for trying. On the 14th, he shut the pit. Actually shut it, not talked about shutting it. He put a cat on it and covered it and ran the machine over the fill twice. He put out an order that from that morning all waste went into sealed drums, and the drums went out to Glenallen on the supply run, which cost the company money and cost Wendell a telephone call from Anchorage that he did not enjoy and did not repeat to us. And he put out a second order, which was that nobody discharged a firearm on that spread for any reason, and that if a bear came into camp, you went inside and you shut the door and you waited. It made no difference at all. On the 16th, there was a fourth one, and it was 30 feet from the steps of the sleeping trailer. 30 feet. Close enough that a man coming out for a piss at 2 a.m. walks into it in the dark before he sees it. And one of us did exactly that, and the sound he made brought 5 people out. 600, 300, 150, 30. The generator went down on the 17th, fuel line. It took 4 hours to sort out, and we sat in that camp from 4 in the afternoon until 8 in the evening with no lights on the pad at all. 8 men and a cook with flashlights and 1 running pickup with its high beams pointed north up the line, and nobody said one word the whole time about why the truck was pointed north. Fern quit on the 17th. She told Wendell she was going out on the supply truck, and Wendell asked her to finish the week, and she told him no. She did not do it quietly. She stood in that mess in her apron and told 8 grown men that she had been saying since October that the hole was going to bring us something, and that it had, and that we had all decided to be stupid about it together. Then she went and packed. Junior helped her carry her bag out to the truck, and I shook her hand, and she held on to it for a second and told me not to be the last one out. On the 18th, I went to Hal's trailer because he had stopped coming to meals, and Fern had been leaving plates on the step, and the plates were still there in the morning. He would not open the door. We had the entire conversation through it. He told me the knocking had changed. I asked him how. He said it was not 2 or 3 anymore. He said it had gotten down to 1, and it was close, and it was on a rhythm, and the rhythm had a shape to it, and he had worked out what the shape was. He said it was his name. I told him that was the whiskey and the dark and 6 weeks of no sleep. I told him to eat something. I stood out there in the cold in front of a shut door and told a 46-year-old man to eat something. He said one more thing before I left. He said he had been counting and that the count went down every night, and that the night before it had been at 1. I did not ask him one what. I have had 47 years to think of the follow-up question, and I did not ask it standing right there with my hand on the door. That night, I lay in my bunk and listened, and there was knocking from 3 directions. I do not know whether that means Hal was wrong, or whether it means I never understood what he was counting. Then it was the 19th. The Alaska State Troopers were notified by radio from mile 617 at 8:15 in the morning on November 19th, 1978. A unit reached the camp at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The finding entered on the report is exposure with post-mortem animal disturbance. Halbert Rennick's blood alcohol was tested and returned a level consistent with heavy drinking. The overnight low that night at the nearest recording station was -4 Fahrenheit. The report runs 4 pages. It is not an unreasonable document. A man was drinking, a man went outside at night in November in the Alaska interior, and a man died of the cold. That happens in that state every winter, and it happened that year to 11 other people. There is one paragraph in it that does not fit the finding. The attending trooper noted that the decedent's position appeared in his word on the form deliberate. He noted the absence of the disorganized posture typical of hypothermia. He noted the arms at the sides, the legs extended, and the head oriented north up the right-of-way. He noted that there was no disturbance in the snow between the trailer door and the body. That paragraph appears once and is not referred to again anywhere in the file. No follow-up interview was conducted with any member of the crew. Wendell Crosby's camp log survives for October and November of 1978. The entry for October 26th is one line and records a firearm discharge on the spread with no injury. The entry for November 9th is 2 lines. It records the third animal, and it uses the word placement, which does not appear anywhere else in 11 weeks of daily entries, not before and not after. Between those 2 dates, 2 pages have been removed. They were cut along the gutter with something sharp, and the stubs are clean and square, which means it was not done in a hurry and it was not done in the field with a pocket knife. The dates covered would be November 1st through November 8th. That range contains the knocking. It contains the second placement at the fuel bladders. It contains the argument in the mess on the 4th and 3 men quitting on the 6th. And it contains the rifle. The book was in Wendell Crosby's possession from November of 1978 until he handed it to the insurance investigator in March of 1979. It went from that office to a claims file and from the claims file into a box. Crosby was interviewed once by telephone in December. He confirmed the firearm order and the closure of the pit. He stated that the pages were not missing when the book left his hands. He was not asked a second time. He died in Wasilla in 1996. The pit was covered under a variance granted on December 14, 1978. The application describes the contents as domestic solid waste. It does not mention any animals. Nothing has ever been dug out of that ground. The fill on it is now nearly 50 years old. The man who did not walk out to the highway was Junior Bellwether. He was 22, and he was from Kalispell, Montana. He did not leave on the supply truck with Fern on the 17th. Terry Vasco believed for 11 years that he had, and it is in the statement that way, and it is wrong, and Vasco learned it was wrong in 1989 from Bellwether's sister in a telephone call he did not initiate. Bellwether left camp on foot sometime between 2 and 5 in the morning on the 19th of November. That is the same night Halbert Rennick died, 40 feet from the trailer door. The search ran 9 days with ground crews and 1 aircraft. They found 2 things. At 1.5 miles north of camp, on the cleared line, in the open, they found a knit cap belonging to him. At 4.25 miles north, also on the cleared line, also in the open, they found his boots, both of them, set upright, side by side, laces tucked into the tops, pointing north. The search was called on November 28th, and then the numbers. From the sleeping trailer door, the first was at 600 feet, the second at 300, the third at 150, the fourth at 30. Terry Vasco stepped every one of those himself with 100-foot tape and a roustabout on the dumb end, and wrote them on the back of a Weld procedure sheet, and that sheet was submitted with his statement and is the last page of it. 600, 300, 150, 30. He did not comment on the sequence, neither did the investigator. I am not going to tell you what it was. Nobody who was at mile 617 ever said what it was, including the man who stood 70 feet from it in the dark and watched it walk past him. And if he would not say it, then I am certainly not going to say it on his behalf. What I will point at is the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the only part of this that does not require you to believe anything at all. 600, 300, 150, 30, each one closer than the one before, each one on ground that meant something, each one facing the same direction. That is a sequence, and a sequence is a thing that has a next term. The spread struck camp on the 30th of November and moved south, and whatever the next term was, it did not get taken because there was nothing left standing on that pad to take it from. Terry Vasco worked another 19 years in the Alaska interior, and never took another job north of Glen Allen. He gave his statement once, in March of 1979, to a man whose only interest was whether a contractor was liable for a security guard freezing to death, and then he never spoke about it again on any record that survives.
There is one loose thread in those 22 pages, and it is the one that has bothered me the longest. He described the peeled length of spruce, 6 feet, bark stripped, pale. Nothing like it was ever recovered from mile 617, not on the pad, not at any of the 4 locations, not along the drag lines, not anywhere in a 9-day search area that ran 4.25 miles up an open, cleared right-of-way. And not one person who was in that camp that fall could say what it was for. It was not being used as a weapon. It was not being used to move anything, because the animals were carried, and the drag marks were the animals themselves. It was just in its hand, every single time. Terry Vasco had a theory about that in the last half page of his statement, and he had the sense to put it as a question, so I'm going to leave it as one. He asked what a man carries when he goes out to mark a line. Real or fake, you decide. For 32 years, my father walked out of the woodpile after dark and held up a child's shoe so that something at the edge of the trees could look at it. He did that every night he was able to. In the winter, in the rain, the year he had pneumonia, the week after his mother's funeral. 900 and some entries in a notebook, most of them 1 word long. And every one of those nights, it looked at the shoe and did nothing else. This past spring, for the first time in 52 years, something else happened. I'm not going to tell you what yet. I have been sitting on it since March, and I'm going to tell it in order, because if I tell you now, you will not understand what it cost. And it cost everything my family had.
Let me tell you what it looks like, so we can get that out of the way and not keep circling it. It stands upright and it is somewhere over 7 feet, and I know that because it has stood against the corner post of our woodshed, which my father set at 7'4". It is heavier through the chest and shoulders than the pictures make it. The hair is long and coarse, and it is a rust brown that goes almost black at the hands and the feet. In the winter, it is paler. The face is the part nobody gets right. There is no muzzle. It is a flat, wide human face with a heavy bone ridge over the eyes and a broad nose, and the skin of it is gray, brown, and weathered like the back of an old man's hands. The eyes take the light and hold it. Its left ear has a notch out of it, a split in the top edge, and it has had that notch since before I was born. I am 62 years old. My name is Arlen Deshane. I have kept my father's arrangement alone for 17 years since he died, and I never once expected it to change. The reason I am telling this now is that the property is inside a harvest block. There was survey ribbon on our cut line in March, and I have started walking north. We are from Hornpain in northern Ontario. If you do not know it, it is a rail town on the Canadian National Main Line north of Lake Superior, about 6 hours from Thunder Bay if the road is behaving. The property is 26 kilometers east of town on an old cut line past the last plowed road. There is still no cell service out there, and I do not expect there ever will be. My father was Raymond Deshane. He was born in 1931, and he went on the section gang for the railway at 17, and he stayed on it for 41 years, which in that town made him ordinary. He built the woodshed in 1961 out of jack pine. He skidded himself with a borrowed horse, and it is still standing, and the roof is the original roof. My mother was Odile. She was from Kapuskasing. She played the organ at St. Anne's for 11 years. There were two of us. I was born in 1964. My sister Colette was born in 1968. I want to say one thing before I go any further, and I want to say it plainly. My father was not a strange man. He was not a drinker. He was not a bushman. He was not one of these people who go out in the country to get away from something. He voted. He paid into the union. He took us to Mass at Christmas and Easter and complained about it both times. Everybody who tells you my father was strange met him after 1974. There are people alive in Hornpain who will confirm the small parts of this if you go and ask them. Ask about the section gang and the years he was on it. Ask about the search in 74 and what the town did during it. There are still 4 or 5 who are out on that line and can tell you exactly what the weather was. They will not confirm the rest. I do not expect them to, and I do not hold it against them. August 17th, 1974. I was 10, Colette was 6. It was a Saturday, and it was hot, and I mean the specific kind of hot you get up there maybe 9 days of summer, where the black flies quit, and the air over the cut line goes soft and wobbly. My mother was in town, my father was on shift, I was watching my sister. That is the sentence. I have had 52 years to find a different way to say it, and there is not one. I was watching my sister, and then I was not. She was on the packed dirt at the side of the shed with a coffee can and a spoon, digging a hole, which is what she did. She dug holes. She had 4 or 5 going at any time, and she got angry if you stepped in one. I went inside for maybe 11 minutes. There was a hockey card thing I was sorting on the kitchen floor, and I have never in my life been able to make myself remember it as anything more important than that. When I came out, the coffee can was on its side and the spoon was in the hole, and she was not there. I want to describe the next part carefully because people always assume it went fast, and it did not. For the first 40 minutes, I was not frightened. I was annoyed. I walked the property calling her name, and I was rehearsing what I was going to say to her when I found her. Then I got to the cut line, and I looked east along it, and it runs straight for 2 kilometers before it bends, and there was nobody on it in either direction, and that is the moment. That is when the whole rest of my life started. I ran to the Bergerons, which was 3 kilometers, and I got there at a dead run in the heat, and I could not talk for a full minute when Madame Bergeron opened the door. The Ontario Provincial Police were on the property before 6 that evening. My father came off shift, and they had already started. The search ran 9 days. I have never seen anything like what that town did. There were men out there who had a shift the next morning, and they went out anyway. There were women running food up the cut line in the back of a truck for a week. The railway put a speeder crew on the line. They had dogs by the second day. They had a Cessna on the 4th. And on the second day, 90 meters into the bush north of the shed, on open ground under a stand of spruce where you could see a good distance in every direction, somebody found a shoe. It was a canvas running shoe, child size 11, left foot. It was blue and it had white rubber over the toe, and my mother had written the letter C inside the tongue in ballpoint because there had been a mix-up at the school. It was sitting upright. There was nothing else. No drag, no blood, nothing disturbed. The ground under those spruce was needle duff, and it does not hold sign well, but it holds some, and there was nothing, just a little shoe standing up on the ground 90 meters from the house, in a place that 4 separate people had already walked past that morning. They called the search on the 26th. Now, I will tell you the other thing about that autumn, late September. I could pin it to within a week, but not a day. It was after the leaves and before the first real snow. I woke up around 2 in the morning because I heard the kitchen door. Our house was small and my bedroom window looked out the back at the shed and the woodpile, and past that the tree line, maybe 40 meters of open ground. There was a bulb over the shed door that my father left on all night that fall and had never left on before. My father was standing at the woodpile. He had his back to me and he was in his shirt sleeves in September in northern Ontario, which he would have called a foolish way to catch your death, and he was completely still. And there was something in the trees. At first I thought bear, and I want to be fair to my 10-year-old self, because bear is what you think. It was big, and it was dark, and it was at the edge of the light, and bear is the correct answer 999 times out of 1,000. They stood there, both of them. I do not know for how long because I was 10 and I had no reason to look at a clock, but it was long enough that I got cold at the window and did not move. Then my father's arm came up. He raised his right arm out in front of him at about shoulder height, and he held it there, and he was holding something small, and I could not see what. And the thing at the tree line came forward. 2 steps, maybe 3. Out of the trees and onto the open ground, and it stood up. Bears do stand, I know that. I had seen bears stand. This did not stand the way a bear stands, up on the back legs with the front paws hanging and the balance all wrong and the whole animal apologizing for it. This was already standing. It came out of the trees on 2 legs the way a man comes around a corner, and it kept coming on 2 legs, and the way its weight went from 1 foot to the other was so ordinary and so wrong that I put my hand over my mouth. My father did not move. After a while, he lowered his arm, and the thing went back into the trees, and my father stood there for another minute, and then he came in. I got back into bed before he reached the stairs. I did not say a single word about it to anybody for 4 years. October of 1978. I was 14. I had heard the kitchen door probably 400 times by then. Some nights I looked and some nights I did not, and I'd gotten very good at not thinking about it in the daytime, which is a skill you can learn if you start young enough. That night I went out. I did not plan it. I heard the door and I put my boots on, and I went out the front and around, and I came up on the woodpile from the side, and he heard me at about 10 meters because he was my father and I was 14 and had never been quiet in my life. He did not send me back. That is the thing I did not expect. He turned his head and he saw it was me. And he turned back around and he made a small motion with his hand that meant stand there and be still. So I stood there and I was still. It came out of the trees inside of 2 minutes. Up close and standing in the light of 1 bulb, it was not like the thing I had seen from the window. It was much worse and much better at the same time, and I am aware that does not make sense. Worse because of the size. I was a tall 14, and it made me feel like an object. Better because of the face. Because a face is a face. Because when a thing has a face and it is looking at your father and it is not doing anything, some very old part of you files it under person and not under animal. And once that filing happens, you cannot undo it. My father raised his arm, and I saw what was in his hand. It was Colette's shoe, the blue canvas one, the left one. He held it up at shoulder height and the thing came forward 3 steps. He lowered his arm and it stopped. He raised it again and it came forward 2 more. He lowered it, it stopped. He did that twice more and it worked twice more, and then he put his arm down and stood there. And after a long time, the thing turned and went back in. We went inside. He put the shoe in a coffee can on the shelf by the door and put the lid on it and washed his hands, and he sat down at the kitchen table. I asked him what it was. He said he did not know. I asked him how long. He said since that fall. I asked him what he was doing out there. And this is the part I have never been able to get past, because he thought about it for a while, like a man who has been asked a fair question and wants to answer it properly. He said he was asking. That was all. He said he was asking, and then he got up and went to bed. And I understood something that night that took me another 30 years to be able to put into words. He was not feeding it. There was never any food. He was not befriending it, and he was not studying it, and he was not afraid of it. He was holding up the only object left in the world that belonged to his daughter, to the only thing he had ever encountered that might know something, and he was asking it a question. And it kept coming closer when he asked, every single time. For 32 years, it kept almost answering. He gave me the rules that winter at the kitchen table, and he gave them to me the way he gave me instructions about the wood stove. Flat, practical, no ceremony. Never go out at the same hour twice in a row. Never let it come inside the shed. Never speak to it. Not one word, not ever, not even your own name. And never bring the shoe back in dirty. If it touches the ground, you wipe it before it goes in the can. I asked him about the last one. That seemed like the strange one to me. He said it was not for its benefit. He said it was for ours. I did not understand that for about 15 years. It started leaving things the summer, or it had been leaving them all along, and I had never looked. They were not gifts. I want to be careful with the word gift because people hear that and they think of a friendly animal bringing you a shiny rock, and that is not what this was. The things it left were made. A spruce branch stripped completely clean of bark, every twig taken off flush, about 1 meter long, laid across the chopping block. 6 stones stacked, which is not remarkable, except they were stacked largest on top and it did not fall over. And I have tried perhaps 40 times over the years to do that with the same stones, and I have never once made it stand. And in August, a length of rail spike wire, the soft, galvanized stuff the section gangs used, 3 strands, braided tight, and even for about 18 inches, and then just stopped. I put them in a coffee tin, not the shoe tin, a different one. I still have it. I was 18 and I had a girl in town, and I had been walking the 4 kilometers from the rail crossing in the dark on a regular basis and thinking nothing of it. That March it walked me home. I did not see it. I heard it once about 200 meters back on the cut line, breaking through crust. Then nothing for 4 or 5 minutes. Then it again, still about 200 meters back. That went on for 40 minutes. It never got closer, and it never fell behind, and it never made a sound that it did not intend to make, because a thing that size in March crust makes noise every step unless it is choosing not to. When I got to the yard, the sound stopped and did not start again. I stood in the kitchen with my coat on, and my father was at the table with a cup of tea at 1 a.m, and he looked at me. And I said, it followed me. He said, it walked you. I asked what the difference was. He said the difference was that I got here. And I understood, standing there at 18 years old, that my father's arrangement was not only my father's, that I had been inside something my whole life without being told. And I did not know whether to feel protected or owned, and I have honestly never settled it. My mother left in the spring of '85, and I'm going to compress this because it is not mine to tell in detail. She had never accepted it. Not the thing at the tree line, which she refused to have discussed in the house, and not the going out. She believed for a long time something about why he went out that was not true. I will not put the specific shape of it into words. It involved another person, and it involved the town. And it was wrong. It was wrong, and my father knew it was wrong, and he never once defended himself, because to defend himself, he would have had to say what he was actually doing. And he had decided by then that saying it out loud would finish her. So he let her think the other thing. He let his wife of 19 years think the other thing for 2 years rather than tell her he was standing in the dark holding up their dead daughter's shoe. The marriage did not end because of the arrangement. The marriage ended in August of 1974, and it took 11 years to fall down. She lived in Carcass until 2001. I saw her at Christmas. We got on all right. She never came back to the property. He showed me the notebook. It was a black, hardbound school exercise book, and he was on his third one. Every night he went out, he wrote the date, and then he wrote one word. I sat at the kitchen table and I turned pages for probably an hour. Most of them said the same thing. Looked. Some said no. That meant it did not come. A very few said close. And in the whole of the first 2 books, 4 entries said something different, and all 4 of them said the same thing, which was turned. I asked him what turned meant. He said 4 times it had turned its head and looked north instead of at the shoe. I asked him what was north. He said that was the question. 2 men came around that summer from an outfitting company out of Thunder Bay. A rail crew had reported something on the line east of town, and it had gotten into the paper in a small way, and these 2 had driven 6 hours on the strength of it. They were not fools and they were not rude. They had good equipment in the truck, and they had a list of properties, and they had money. They offered my father $2,000 for access to the cut line for a season, plus a bonus that they described in a way I understood even at 25 was designed not to be written down. My father lied to them. He was terrible at it. My father could not lie. He told them there had never been anything on this property, and he said it in the voice of a man reading a card. And I watched both of those men decide right there in the yard that this was the place. They came back twice, once in September and once the following June. The second time my father stood in the yard and told them that if he found a camera on his land, he would put it in the stove. And that was the summer I understood the actual situation. It was not that nobody would believe us, it was that some people would. My father was not protecting a secret. He was protecting something, and protecting something like that has no legal standing whatsoever. There is no framework in which a man in Ontario is allowed to stand between 2 licensed outfitters and a thing that does not officially exist. The minute anyone believed him, he became the obstacle. The police reopened Colette's file in the summer of '91. I want to be clear that this was not because of new evidence. It was because somebody in Hornpain told somebody in the detachment that there was a man out on the east cut line who walked into the bush at night carrying his dead daughter's shoe and had done for 17 years. You can see how that sounds. I can see how that sounds. If I were a constable and someone told me that, I would have opened the file too. They interviewed him 3 times. The third one was in Wawa, and it went most of a day, and he drove himself there and back, and he came in the door at 9 at night, and he took his boots off, and he sat down on the bench in the hallway, and he did not get up for a long time. I was 27. I was living in town then. I had come out because I knew what day it was. He did not tell me what they asked him. He never told me. But I know what they asked him because there is only one thing to ask. They asked him where his daughter was. 17 years. 17 years of a man standing in the dark asking the only thing he had ever met that might know. And the answer the world gave him was to decide that he was the one who had done it. Nothing came of it. There was nothing to come of it. They closed it again in the fall. He kept going out. He went out that same night, in fact. I heard the kitchen door at about 1. The entry for that day says looked. He got pneumonia in February of '93, and he was in the hospital in Hearst for 9 days, and then home in bed for 3 weeks after. I was living out there again by then. Marriage had not worked out, and I had come home. I went out with the shoe for the first time on the second night he was in the hospital. I did not want to. I want that understood. I went out because he had asked me to from a hospital bed in a voice with no air in it. and it was the only thing he asked me for in 9 days. I did everything the way he did it. I changed the hour. I did not speak. I stood at the woodpile with a child's shoe in my hand, and I felt like an idiot for about 6 minutes. Then it came, and it came all the way to the chopping block, which is 14 paces from the woodpile, and my father's notebook in 32 years never once recorded it doing that. It stood at the chopping block, and I stood at the woodpile, and there was 14 paces of frozen dirt between us, and it looked at the shoe, and then it looked at me. I do not know what that was. I have never known. I have wondered whether it knew he was sick. I have wondered whether it could tell we were the same. I have wondered whether it just wanted a closer look at somebody new after 19 years of looking at the same man. I did not write it in the notebook. I told him when he got home, and he asked me one question, which was whether I had spoken, and I said no, and he nodded and never brought it up again, but he wrote it in. In my handwriting, it would not have counted. He put it in himself 3 weeks late in his own hand, and the word he used was close. 14 months. It did not come for 14 months, from March of 96 to May of 97. My father went out every single night of it. That is 400 and some nights of a 65-year-old man walking out to a woodpile in the dark and holding up a shoe to an empty tree line, and then coming back in and writing the word no. I asked him in about the 8th month why he was still doing it, and he gave me an answer I did not expect. He said that if it was gone, then it was gone, and there was nothing to be done. But that if it was not gone and it was only away, then the one thing he could control was whether there was anybody at the woodpile when it came back. I have thought about that more than almost anything else he ever said to me. That is not a man dealing with a monster. That is not a man dealing with a mystery either. That is how you wait for somebody. It came back in May of 97, and it was fine that summer, and it was fine in 98. In September of 99, it was not fine. It was gray through the shoulders and down the back, not the winter pale, actually gray, the way an old dog goes gray. It had come down in weight. You could see the shape of the shoulder underneath, and it was carrying its left hip wrong. It came out of the trees, and it took the weight on that side, and something in the whole movement dipped and caught. And it did that on every step for the rest of its life. My father stood there with his arm up, and he watched it come across the open ground, and he made a sound. That was the second time I saw my father cry. The first was in 1974 in front of a police constable. He was 68. It had been coming across that ground for 25 years. I do not know how old it was, and I have no way to know. But I know what it looks like when something you have known your whole adult life starts to go. And my father knew it too. And I think what got him was very simple. He had always assumed he would run out of time first. 30 years to the day. August 17th, 2004. I do not know whether he planned it or whether it happened. Knowing him, he did not plan it, but he certainly knew the date, because he knew that date every year of his life. He went out at about 11. It came slow on the bad hip. He raised the shoe, and it did not stop at the chopping block. It came all the way to the woodpile, and it stood in front of my father at a distance I would put at under 2 meters, and my father was a 73-year-old man of 5'9", and it was what it was. And they stood there. I was at the corner of the house, and I did not move a muscle, and I counted, because I did not know what else to do with myself, and I counted to something over 600 before it moved. 11 minutes. Nothing happened. It did not touch him. It did not touch the shoe. It did not make a sound. At the end of 11 minutes, it turned around and went back into the trees. He came inside and got the notebook out, and I stood there waiting to see what he was going to write. And I remember being angry, actually angry, that a word was all there was going to be. He wrote, looked. I asked him how he could write that. After that, he said it was the truth. He said that was all it had done. Then he said the other thing, and he said it without any drama at all, closing the book. He said 30 years, and it had not once told him no. He died on the 14th of February, 2009 at home, of a heart that had been going for 4 years. He was 77. I found the coffee can on the shelf by the door where it had been since I was 14. The shoe was in it, blue canvas, size 11, left foot, the letter C in ballpoint inside the tongue, worn nearly to nothing. I found the other tin with the stripped branch and the stones and the braided wire. And I found the notebook, the 5th one. The last entry in it is dated the 10th of February, 4 days before he died. He was not able to walk to the woodpile in February of 2009. I know that because I was in the house and I was doing everything for him by then. I do not know how he got out there. I have never worked it out. The entry says close. I have kept it up for 17 years, not out of belief. I want to be straight about that because people always want this to be a story about faith, and it is not one. I kept it up because I could not work out how to stop, because if you have watched a man do a thing every night of your childhood and he dies, and the thing is still out there in the trees, then not going out is a decision. And I never made that decision. So I go out, I change the hour, I do not speak, I raise the shoe. It comes maybe one night in 4 now. It is very old. The hip has gone almost entirely, and it does not come out of the trees so much as arrive at the edge of them and stand. Somewhere in the first few years alone, I started to understand something about the arrangement that my father either never worked out or never told me, and I leaned toward the second. I had always thought it came to us. It does not come to us. It comes past us. We are on its way to somewhere, and we have been for 52 years. And the reason it stops is that we are the only thing on the route that has not changed. And in that time, nothing has ever come down that cut line from the north that should not have. But I will give you 3 things and you can weigh them yourself. In 1988, 2 moose hunters from southern Ontario came up our cut line in a truck and camped 1.5 kilometers north of us and left in the middle of the night. And one of them came to my father's door at 4 a.m. and asked to use a telephone we did not have and would not say why. Every dog my family has owned since 1974 has refused to go past the shed after dark. 4 dogs, 4 different temperaments, one of them a shepherd cross that was afraid of nothing else on this earth. And in 2011, a man walked out of the bush onto Highway 631, 40 kilometers north of us in October with no coat. And he could not tell anybody where he had come from or how long he had been out there, and he never has. I am not telling you those things prove anything. They do not. I am telling you that I stopped being afraid of the thing at the tree line a long time ago, and I did not stop being afraid. Now, in March of this year, there was survey ribbon on the cut line, orange on the alders every 30 meters, running north from just past our fence. The property is inside a harvest block. It has been for 2 years, and I did not know because the notice goes in a paper I do not read and on a website I do not visit, and because nobody thinks to tell a man on an old cut line anything. The block is scheduled, there is a road going in. I stood on the cut line in March with a piece of orange ribbon in my hand, and I understood completely and immediately and without any evidence whatsoever that the arrangement was over. I knew it before anything happened. I want that on the record. I knew in March. It came on the 11th of April. It came at 4 p.m. Daylight, full gray daylight with the snow going off the open ground and the whole yard visible for 200 meters in every direction. In 52 years, it had never once come in daylight, not once. Not in my father's notebooks, not in my own memory, not ever. I was at the woodpile with a splitting maul in my hand and no shoe and no ritual and nothing prepared because it was 4 p.m. on a Saturday. It came out of the trees at the north corner and it came straight across the open ground. I went in the house and I got the can off the shelf and I came back out and my hands were not working properly and I got the lid off on the 3rd try. It had come to the chopping block by then. I raised the shoe and it did not look at it. 52 years, 900 and some entries, every single time without exception in my father's hand and in my memory, the answer was the same word. And the word was looked. It did not look at it. It came the rest of the way on the bad hip, and it stood over me at a distance where I could hear it breathing and smell it and see the split in the top of its left ear that had been there my entire life. And it took the shoe out of my hand. Not fast, not roughly. It closed its hand around the shoe and it took it and I let go. And I want to be honest, I did not decide to let go. My hand opened. Then it turned and it walked north. Not into the trees. That is the part I need you to hear properly, because it matters more than anything else in this account. It did not go into the bush at the tree line where it has gone every night for 52 years. It went up the cut line, in the open, northbound, in daylight, on the ground where the orange ribbon was. And it did not hurry. And it stopped twice. At about 80 meters it stopped and it turned its head and it looked back at me. And I was standing exactly where I'd been standing, and after a moment it went on. At about 200 meters, right where the line starts to bend, it stopped and turned and looked back again. I was still standing there. It went around the bend and I did not see it again. I have not seen it since the 11th of April. I want to say one thing and then I am done, and I am only going to say it once because my father never said it at all. For 52 years, every institution that came near this treated the thing on our cut line as one of 3 things. The police treated it as a lie a man told to cover up what he had done to his daughter. The outfitters treated it as a resource, $2,000 and a bonus not written down. And the ministry and the company and the harvest block and the orange ribbon treat it as nothing at all, which is the worst of the 3 because you cannot even argue with it. My father treated it as somebody who might know something. That is the whole difference. That is the entire difference between my father and every organization that ever touched this. And I would like somebody to notice which of those 2 approaches got an answer, because he did get one. It took 32 years of his life and 17 of mine, and it came on the 11th of April at 4 p.m, and it was not a word, it was a direction. I have been walking north since May. I go out in the mornings, up the cut line, past the bend, and further each time. I am 62, and my own hip is not what it was, and I do not get far in a day, but I have been doing it since May, and I have a route, and I have a camp at the far end of it. I'm not going to tell you how far I have gotten. I'm not going to tell you what I have found, or whether I have found anything, or what I think is up there. I am telling this now because I am the last one who knows any of it. My mother is gone, my father is gone, my sister has been gone since the 17th of August, 1974, and there is nobody else. And because in about a year there is going to be a road up that cut line, and after that there will not be anything to find. So I want it written down somewhere that a man named Raymond Deshane stood at a woodpile for 32 years and asked a question and was answered. And I want it written down which way I went.
I hope you enjoyed these encounter stories. I was Alex. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.